Good morning, good afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues, friends. I'm so happy to be here, standing in my mother's office, FAO. You see, headquarters. And with my really great colleagues. Some of you I know, maybe there are some new faces, that's great. So I think there are also other colleagues in the different regions who are connected, is that right? So you see, I feel home, so nobody has to introduce me, so that's great. So for the, let's say, because we have only 1 hour, we have already like 10 minutes gone, we have 1 hour. This is meant really to be a conversation, a discussion, sharing what our thoughts, what our priorities are in Africa, together with our colleagues. So, you know, I'm not working alone in Africa. We have the great opportunity to have Edward Kilawe with us from the subregional officer for Southern Africa, one of the main important, you know, sub-regions too. And we have also colleagues, Jeremy, who is in the Central Africa, Patrice Savadogo from West Africa, and Patrick Bahal, who is officer in charge for Forestry Programme also for East Africa. So I would like just to convey to you this, you know, few ideas and our priorities, and then of course to open the floor for more discussion and interaction, you know. So we've put just few slides, like 5 slides, not more, to start with. So, forests in Africa, based on the FRA, on the Forest Resource Assessment in 2015, it seemed we had like 624 million hectares of forest in Africa. Now, this data, we don't know if it is increasing, decreasing. We will hear very soon, hopefully, with the FRA results that will come in 2020, you know, very soon, this year. But based on the FRA, let's say, past data, we have, of course, observed a decline of forest area in Africa of 2.8 million hectares per year between 2010, for the period 2010 and 2015, which is really very massive. And of course, this is forest cover. Actually, it's a bit almost a quarter of the land area. We know that forests in Africa are important in terms of biodiversity, in terms of you know, provision of the clean air and water quality. And it is really the basis in Africa. More than 80%, between 80 and 90%, forests in Africa are really the source for energy, and as you know, the charcoal, you know, fuel wood for cooking and for heating, and for many other diverse purposes. And it's, of course, the importance of Africa's forests is very high in the region, because it is really the basis for the livelihoods, foods and food security and nutrition, as well as medicines. And of course, they are a main carbon let's say, stocks, and also forests are really are key to build resilience to climate change there. In Africa, of course, you know, when we talk about forests, we talk also about wildlife, because there, you know, even our commission is called African Forestry and Wildlife Commission, given the importance of wildlife in the region. We are looking at the contribution of forests at different levels, at different, you know, targets and development agenda. Of course, there is the UN Development Agenda 2030, the SDGs, but also within Africa, we have what we call the Agenda 2063 of the African Union, that also calls for sustainable management of forests and natural resources and their contribution to the development agenda in the region. How are we, you know, working, or how are we setting our priorities in Africa? for forestry. So there are different sources of, let's say, frameworks that really advise us. As you know, FAO responds to the request of member countries. So we do what our member countries want us to do. So, and we have within FAO, of course, the statutory body that we have, the COFO, the Committee on Forestry, but more also importantly, the African Forestry and Wildlife Commission. We have missed to organize our commission last year, but the next one, actually it will be planned, it is postponed for 9 to 13 March 2020 in South Africa, in the Kruger National Park, under the theme Forest and Wildlife, Africa's Diversity for Shared Prosperity and Security. So you can a bit imagine the importance we gave this time for the theme to address within the AFWC, and diversity, looking at biodiversity, looking at the human diversity, as the economic diversity, security, and so on. Other frameworks that are really very important and key for us to also take care and look at and respond to for our member countries is what we call the African Union strategies or frameworks. There is one finally developed, and of course with support of FAO, which is called the AU, the African Union Sustainable Forest Management Framework 2020-2030, which is now under endorsement of the AU Summit. It has been already endorsed by the ministers of forest, environment, and forest, environment, and water during their last meeting in Addis Ababa in October. We have also what we call an African Union wildlife strategy, which is exactly on combating illegal exploitation and illegal trade in wild fauna and flora in Africa. Wildlife here, with the African Union, they are looking at it really at flora, plants and animals. We have, of course, the sub-regional, let's say, frameworks and strategies like the ECOWAS Convergence Plan for Forest Sustainable Management and Utilization for West Africa, covering 15 countries, the one for SADC, which is, the southern part of Africa, covering 16 countries, IGAD and the East Africa Community Forest Policies and Strategies, also covering a total of 7 countries, and of course the COMIFAC one, Forest Strategy, which also is looking at Central Africa, 10 countries. So the priorities we, in the region, RAF, sub-regional offices, and of course, with the support of our colleagues from forestry departments and other departments and divisions, should really prioritize these areas. And of course, based on those strategies and frameworks, and even we as FAO, we have been looking at the different challenges that are actually impacting forestry, forest management, sustainable management, and conservation in Africa. And many of them, them, there are threats, but also there are drivers of their threats, looking at the of course, the need for opportunities, sustainable livelihood, economic opportunities to reduce poverty reduction, all the issues of illegalities and illicit exploitation and overharvesting of resources, either through grazing, overgrazing, or wood and non-wood forest products, also impacting the foresting and the sector, the issue of conversion, and the number one, as we know, the conversion of forest to agriculture. So deforestation and degradation of forests are really linked to the conversion of agriculture. So this is all, I think, different challenges what we need to look at, but in an integrated way, and looking at them also in a context in Africa where the forestry sector really is characterized by an informal setting, which really is not easy. Sometimes, the production, the processing, and the trade are informal, so it's really difficult then to track and to have transparency and sustainable management of the resources from the land to the end product. And this, of course, gives, how can I say, opportunities for illegalities and illicit exploitation, of course, not only and the markets, and this is with the link with the markets in different continents and other countries. So therefore, our really flagship, let's say, priority for Africa is, from one side, protect what we have today, sustainably manage what we have, and restore what is degraded. And looking at it really in a cross-sectoral way, and I think this is not a novelty for us here. We all are looking at this and, of course, working across SPs and addressing the three main conventions: biodiversity, the UN Convention to combat desertification, and also the UNFCCC, so climate change. So the first priority is really, of course, to reduce deforestation, but to do that, we need really to address the drivers of degradation and of deforestation. And we do that, of course, through supporting policies, strategies, regulations in countries at sub-regional level, but also at continent level for sustainable forest management, improving the governance and promotion of organized and transparent trade. And of course, this is to address the issue of illicit exploitation of forest and wildlife products, improvement of forest-based livelihoods, so sustainable livelihoods based, of course, on the sustainable harvesting, processing, trade of wood and non-wood forest products, but of course with value chains that should be climate smart, of course, but also that should provide income, more income to the local communities on the ground, and also looking at the equity issues and equitable, let's say, outcomes to the local communities on the ground in Africa, and of course through, sustainable wildlife management tools. And this is one of the main issues also to address the human-wildlife, livestock, in ecosystem interface or conflicts. And last but not least, of course, is really to work with mainstreaming biodiversity in agriculture sectors. The issues, the solutions are should not only looked in the forestry sector, but we need to influence the other sectors, agriculture, livestock, and other sectors, in order to reduce the threats and degradation of forests in the area. The second priority, of course, restore, call it ecosystem, call it forest and landscape restoration. It's really about restoring the social, environmental, and economic functions of the forests, and of course using a landscape approach, looking at from the land, from the seed to the end product, and of course the benefits to the communities. And here it's not really, I think, a surprise if we are looking at two important, let's say, ecosystems, like dryland ecosystems, like, for example, through the Great Green Wall, and certainly the mangroves and the small island development developing countries, which are really let's say, the coastal areas, which are really also very vulnerable. Looking at these two main vulnerable ecosystems, and of course this is in the framework of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So we have a great opportunity here, decade of 2020-2030, to really push and scale up the good work that we are already doing on the ground, for example, through the project that we have on action against desertification that Mokhtar is leading with other colleagues in the countries. And also we have another instrument, which is what we call the Pan-African Agenda on Ecosystem Restoration, that is actually endorsed by ministers, by the environment ministers, during the UN, the CBD conference in November, and now has been even put as the contribution of Africa to the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and of course including the AFR 100, the Africa Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative, that aims to support or to restore 100 million hectares by 2030. Then the third priority, of course, it's, support the African Union and countries in the NDC implementation and monitoring. And even not only NDC implementation and monitoring, but also reviewing their ambitions in terms of adaptation and mitigation. And here we are working with the African Union and some countries already on the ground. So, of course, pushing for adaptation and mitigation. And this is, of course, through also the resource mobilization that we are doing through GEF and GCF programs. Fourth priority is to improve access to data and information. Of course, these are not put in an order. They are all equally important. So this one is really about improving access to data and information for proper planning, to not just train individuals, but really how we can develop institutional building of the different institutions in the region, in Africa, in the sub-regions, to really assess and monitor, track, and then use that information to decide on which type of management or which type of action they need to do in terms of policy and so on, to reverse the work. And of course, this is of course linking to the SDG indicators. And one thing that we want really to look at, and based on, of course, on the great experience of Asia-Pacific region, led by Thomas Hofer, is really to work on, and this is really a request from the African Union and from some sub-regions like SADC, to work on outlooks or state of forest for Africa, or for example, the SADC sub-region. We had already some requests on this, and we are aiming really to work on that. And the last but not the least, forest education and profession. And when I say here forest, is also wildlife. I forgot the slash, but really it's really forest as, forestry in general, education and profession, because we need not only to restore the natural capital, but we need also to restore the human capital that needs to work hand in hand, the youth and the women in particular, within the different sectors, the institutions, then the private sector in Africa, but also the new generation who will be, coming soon and take the flag, further beyond the old, let's say, generations. I think I will stop here. These are the slides that we put together with Edward and our colleagues in the region who are not together with us, but I think they are connected, just to give a frame for discussion, questions, comments, and of course, all this work, we need to do it, and we are doing it in partnership with different stakeholders, but I think one of the main partnerships that I really treasure is the partnership that we have also in-house within FAO, within the forestry department, the regional offices, the country offices and the sub-regional offices, but also across the different departments, working with climate, biodiversity and land and water department and agriculture department and many other departments that we have also here in headquarters. I don't know, Edward, if you want to say something maybe from your side, if you can come, please, and then we can maybe open the floor for comments and questions and inputs. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, just to put on perspective what Nora has just presented, we thought of looking more at a very high level, these priorities. But however, when it comes down to the sub-regional level, we have specific needs. For us in the sub-region where I'm based, like in Southern Africa, we had a different planning process. Last year, end of last year, we had our multidisciplinary team meeting where we met with FAO reps basically to update some of the priorities. And I've mapped some of the requests which the countries, I think our FAO reps, like we at sub-regional, supporting that. Same time last year, we had a meeting, a planning meeting with SADC Secretariat. They came to Harare, we sat with them. They came up with a list of things they would like support from FAO. And as well as, again, there was some work which was ongoing. I've mapped some of the projects which I'm involved. So I have a number of those. I think I'm one of those officers with a lot of projects in the sub-region. I think so far I'm like LTO, around 25 something project, 25 plus. So she just put that together, but if we just to highlight, for instance, one of the areas where we work very much, and that's why the reason also we are here in Rome this week, we are here for this GF meeting. We are working with the dryland, and this is a bigger priority in my sub-region at the moment, and as well as for SADC. SADC just endorsed the Green Greater Wall initiative for the region as well. So it's being extended down south, and the strategy has been approved by their ministers, and same time they have asked FAO. In fact, just last week, they review, we had end of last year, a request to support the TCP, for instance, to help with the coordination. But then it was end of the biennial, there was no resources. So earlier this month again, they sent a reminder. So I've worked out the proposal on how we can support the coordination and the kind of daily support to institutionalize the strategy itself for the SADC region. And that's where we are trying to anchor this dryland, the GF project, which we have it in the different countries. We have 6 countries which are targeted by the GF7. And again, we are trying to set kind of a hub where we'll be implementing this project, just to allow the knowledge sharing to deal with some of these challenges which Nora just mentioned here, just to give a perspective. But it is a lot of demand. There are things which FAO basically is like, we don't do that, but there's a request. Like maybe we had, those who were involved in the Outlook study, maybe Arvidas would remember. We used to have these famous forest outlook studies for Africa and each sub-region. SADC just reviewed their protocol, their forest protocol, which was developed 2001. They reviewed it last year. And one of the things came from their review is to update the outlook study. So when I was discussing it, I said, how do we go back to that? Because I think FAO get away from it. We are more looking at the FRA every 5 years. But then the SADC say, no, we need to update our member state every 2 years. This is a problem with the sector. That's why the sector is not moving at the same pace with the others. So it's a new area, maybe again coming, although it used to be there, but they're asking for the FAO. We need to get the expertise and support from the headquarters here. I don't think I'll be able to do that alone. But again, since I'm here with Nora, other 3 colleagues are not here, we thought just to share this general, and maybe we can detail per sub-region on what are the really priorities and perhaps some of the ongoing projects so that we can work together. Even we have some things which are not really forestry, but is a cross-sectoral, like what Nora just mentioned. So when you go and look some of the projects, you may not find forest directly, but I'm LTO of even climate change related, some of the biodiversity, NDCs, as Nora mentioned. We have some projects in countries. So maybe I end there and then we allow more questions.
Thank you very much, Edward. I don't know who will facilitate this, but maybe I don't know if we can open the floor. I don't know if this time, if any colleague from the sub-regions, if you are here, you want to say something. I don't know if Jeremy, Patrice, Patrick, or we can first allow some questions. I don't know if you hear us. I'm not sure. I don't know. Do you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. This is Patrick Ball from SFE in East Africa. I have no additions at this point. I think the overview was clear enough. We can accommodate a few clarifications if they are needed when the questions are asked. Thank you.
Patrick, Patrice or Jérémy, if you are there.
Yes, I am there. I think we can move forward with some questions, and if the clarification need, we can provide.
Okay. Okay. The floor is yours. I don't know if there is any mic. Ah, yeah. Okay.
Andrew Tabor here from Social Forestry. I just wanted to say, well, a couple of things and then a sort of a question that I think we may struggle to answer right now, but it would be very helpful for us. You know, the scope and magnitude of the, these priorities are breathtaking at one level. There's lots of things we're trying to accomplish, or that we recognize need action on. What's a little hard from here is, what are we doing across all of these different priorities and where are the gaps? And from that perspective, then where are the most obvious places for headquarters-based people to help you all move this agenda forward? And then also to provide some context, it might be useful to understand a little bit more how we're sort of organized in the region with the regional, sub-regional, and how we can and how people from headquarters can fit into that. So one's an organizational question and one's a prioritization question based on what we're already doing and what needs doing.
Thank you, Andrew. Any other comment? Question? Yeah, Jeff?
Hi, yes, Jeff Campbell from the Forest and Farm Facility. Thanks so much, Nora and Edward, for this. I think we need more of these opportunities when you come here to make sure that the work that gets done globally and here is relevant in the regions. And so I guess my question relates more to the fact that if we look at where our primary linkages are, it's still with governments or regional governmental, intergovernmental organizations. And I know that there's also some, either regional or even Africa-wide organizations. We have the Africa Forest Forum and other things like that. Where do you see the opportunities for forest-dependent communities, small producers, etc., to organize, let's say, above national level? Is it primarily, should it be at the regional level, or? I mean, we have farmer organizations in Africa which are much better organized, but we don't have very strong organizations of people who are more forest dependent. So that's just a sort of a, obviously coming from the FFF, we're interested in strengthening those kinds of organizations in countries, but also more broadly. And I'm just wondering if there are opportunities. I know we signed an agreement with ROPA, for instance, to work more on community forestry and those kinds of things. But that goes out of the typical box where forestry has maybe worked in the past.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other? Yeah, Safia?
Just to add to Jeff's comment here, that I think we're missing a big stakeholder in the discussion in setting the priorities. Perhaps, I don't know if civil society organizations are involved in the AU and other priority setting exercises, but given that 95% of the rural lands are governed under customary tenure and only 3% are formalized, it really seems like it's a very state-centric perspective on the priorities. And it would be interesting to see how these customary institutions are engaged or not, and in a formal capacity in governance of forests.
Okay, I think if there are no comments at this stage, maybe we can start giving some responses. You want me, Edward, to start? Regarding the issue of the, Okay, the priorities, of course, as we said, they are really at a higher level. Yeah, at a higher level, we needed to group them. So what are, of course, you would be interested to know what is already under implementation, taken care of, and what is not, the gaps. Actually, this exercise is a very important exercise that is still, you know, we don't have the bigger picture. I tell you why. A bigger picture within Africa, from one side. We need to do this exercise, this mapping exercise now, where we are, as we did, for example, the exercise for the recommendations of the AFWC, that I shared the table to see what has been done from headquarters, from the sub-regions, etc., and so on. So this is exactly sharing these priorities. Then we need to have like a tableau de bord, as you say, where we know what the relevant work you are doing through FFF, through the Great Green Wall project, through FLRM program, through the IP program, and so on, and others, what is already taken and what is needed, you know, still to fill the gap, and also fill through resource mobilization and technical support. So this is one. I think this is very important. This is an exercise that we need to do right now. And I would like really to use maybe our ideas for the FTN, also for the FTN Africa, but this is still under discussion. We want to have an FTN Africa to get more understanding, because there is a lot of work done. Sometimes we don't hear about it, we don't know, and maybe you don't know that there are things that are done at the country level, so there are duplication of efforts or mismatching or whatever, and we lose some opportunities. So I think we need to start the year together, you know, having this mapping exercise that is really needed, yeah, and see who does what in Africa. This is one. The second question from Jeff. The second question from still from Andrew regarding how are we organized in our region. You know, as forestry, you know, we have, let's say, my role like as a regional senior forestry officer in Accra, also being the secretary of the African Forestry Wildlife Commission, and we have what we call the sub-regional forestry officers in each sub-region. And then we know also, I think it's important also to say and to realize that there are also other forestry colleagues, players, who are maybe implementing projects, programs in some sub-regional officers or in some country offices. These also need to be, I think, part of the FTN, because even the thinking of the FTN or how we work together as a team in Africa is still biased, because we are not taking advantage and building also on the other resources, forestry officers and colleagues and project managers in the region. So I think this is really something we want to push forward this year, and we were discussing with Edward, but also we'll discuss this further. And I don't know, maybe, I don't know if you want Edward to say something about it in the sub-region. And sorry, and I forgot, in the regional office for Africa, of course, there is me and there is Swalandi, who is the program officer forestry. We are only two in RAF.
Yeah, and maybe just to add on that, how we organize, because also we are a little bit in a weird picture. It's not like sometimes we have the really unit. You have to create our own unit. Like the sub-region where I am, we are only 8 technical officers. 8. 4 of us are based in Johannesburg, and 4 they're based in Harare, but one team. And then when you look at it, it's like basically we do broader, because we are multidisciplinary. We are supposed to deal with the, let's say, like I'm a forester. I have to look at the forestry and the natural resource in a more broader sense, not just in a narrow perspective, because in the forestry I need to do just small things. It has to address agriculture, food security issues in the country. So what's happening is that the resources, they come at sub-region. And we have a sub-regional coordinator where we are responsible. We are not responsible directly like to RAF, let's say, where you have like maybe a team leader. She is responsible to the sub-regional, they call a program leader. That's where the senior officers are responsible. They look more on a bigger picture in the region. But at the sub-regional level, that's where I'm responsible. So in my first port of call is to support the country. So whatever the country needs something, they come to me. So either forestry, like now we don't have land and water in the sub-region, all that things comes to me. Biodiversity, so that's why we may find people have a lot of these responsibility focal points. This is a problem. But when you ask the structure, they say your job is to listen and see and source the expertise in-house. That's why we have to come and rely on your colleagues to support. So this is a little bit of that type of a picture. But the good thing is that we work with the countries, and now countries more and more, they're getting more resources. It makes maybe a little bit we have the project and means to support. So either we can hire people, that's when we get additional, either people work like CTAs or are working as a national project coordinators. That's the same way like we are doing with the GF. That's the only way we can manage all these projects and a lot of ambitious priorities there. Thanks.
And maybe just to add on this, that's why I think, for example, initiatives, flagship initiatives that we have successful and that are working also, for example, in Africa, like the FLEGT, like the FFF, like the FLRM, the Great Green Wall, and so forth, we need also more capacity within the region, within RAF or within the sub-region. I'm not just saying, I think there is also this important, I was always, pleading this, like to have more capacity to deal with different issues for coordination also in Africa region, to support the program and to scale it up and to build, strategies and opportunities. Now, regarding the other question from Jeff, need more opportunities. For forest-dependent people. Of course, all what we are saying this is all with forest-dependent people. Of course, I didn't put all the partners here. Of course, maybe there is something that was misleading when I was saying, or misunderstood, maybe not clear, when I was saying regional framework for priority setting. Don't forget, of course, FAO responds to member countries. If a member country doesn't ask for something, we will not do it. Is that right? I think this is all right for everybody. And for RAF, for example, we have also the African Union Commission. But all these frameworks, all these strategies, these protocols have been developed together with different stakeholders. Maybe Jean-Claude, you have been for the COMIFAC, you know how these things have been built. Different stakeholders, from the NGOs to the CGR, to the private sector, to the governments, and so on. So it's not, but it is, of course, led and taken by and owned by these bodies because they are there to do this work. So we're not doing it because Mr. Director in the African Union said this is what we will be doing. We did workshops. Andrew, you were in the workshop. This is the last workshop that we did. There were many others where different stakeholders were there. There were NGOs, there were community associations, there were different people in that meeting. So it's not an AU, African Union, just framework, but we need really to have a good framework to work and to set priorities. And of course, the organizations, we are working with all the different organizations. The work that we are doing either at the country level, just citing the Great Green Wall, or restoration, other type of activities on restoration and so forth, we are doing it with the communities and with the community associations, with different organizations. It's not, I didn't put all the partners here because it will be like slides and slides of logos and so on. So this is just the higher priorities that I put here. And I think as a next step, I would think it is really very important, maybe we can put it in a table or something, to structure it, to see then what is being done led by, our subregional officers and RAF, and what is also the initiatives that are contributing to address. We have different flagships contributing to one or two issues, many of them, sometimes maybe duplication, sometimes not talking to each other. So we need this complementarity. I have the AFWC in March. I would have loved at one time to have a document, to show what is forestry is doing, FAO Forestry is doing in Africa. I don't have it because it's still always scarce, etc. So maybe we need to build this, but together with your support, to bring all this information and knowledge and then go, because we really miss opportunities to show and give visibility in the region. I'm talking in the region, not in the meetings here, because I really feel it now, because now I am in the region. So I have been in headquarters and now I am in the region and I understand it really better. I understand now better Edward and Jean-Claude and other colleagues that were before me, in the region. So I think this is, otherwise we have a missed opportunity. And Safia, of course, the civil society is really very important. When you've seen the forest education, it was just, to put it in one slide, but the youth and the women and etc. It's really looking at these issues together. We have been supporting a network for African women environmentalists, for instance, including one of the main champions that we have on forest in the region also working. So there are many, many platforms, many involvement of different communities and stakeholders, AFF, and now with ANAFE and many others are really there. So I don't know if colleagues from the sub-regions, Patrick or Patrice, you want to say something more?
I think, this is Patrick. I think the response given was clear enough, but a few additions would be to complement the answer to Jeff's question on the involvement of small producers. As Nora and Edward clarified, the work done in Africa is not only the regular program work. It also involves a few projects here and there, which also involves some colleagues at headquarters. So, for example, if we look at projects looking at restoration of degraded landscapes, there is always a consideration of the livelihood support, which in general involves small producers through small activities to help them maintain their livelihoods while they're supporting restoration activities. So that's just an example of how small producers are involved and supported. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Patrice?
Okay, just to add something on Jeff's question related to, the fact that we have already signed an agreement with ROPA to work, that we need to have maybe organizations, civil society working mainly on forestry issues. In the countries, we do have some, like if we look at in the West African region, we have maybe some organization focusing on non-timber forest product, but having them aggregated at a higher level like ROPA, we don't have them. And as also Nora and Edward already mentioned, we are really embedded. We cannot really make a segregation between forestry and other livelihood means, because in the context of West Africa, all of them are embedded and integrated, and we need to provide support. So I think working more with organizations like ROPA or agro-silvopastoral civil society organization that we have in our regions can also help to foster or also expand the forestry activities we are doing and address some of the key challenges related to deforestation, degradation, and meeting some of our goals in the Africa regions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comment, question? Yes, Edward, can you take the mic, please?
To what, so if I maybe start with the civil society, like our case, I think Nora, you may remember, we got a support from the Africa Union. They were trying to organize a civil society organization to play a key role in the Green Greater Wall in SADC region. So there's some resources, and we in FAO, we supported organizing. We had a very big meeting last year in Angola doing that. Basically, they wanted the civil society to see what can they take it from the strategy so that they can implement at the national level. Particularly, we look at those civil societies with the bigger networks in countries. So they were organized and we were behind FAO to support that. So that's just an entry to see how we can bring them to support the forestry and natural resource related activities. So even at REC level, they see importance of this particular group. And then when it comes to the tenure issues you just mentioned here, it's true, it's something comes in and off. As I mentioned there, one of the planning meeting we had last year with the FAO reps in our multidisciplinary team meeting, these things came up, you just mentioned. And they wanted to see more of the sub-regional supporting that. But I couldn't see where do we get that we don't have people, we don't have really that expertise there really available. And I know like South Africa, Tanzania, Malawi, there were like 3 or 4 countries. They wanted we raised the awareness on the VVGT, the voluntary guideline we have. And also they ask if we can also build the capacity, particularly of the civil society, to understand all this, saying maybe it may really take them far to address some of the challenges on how they are dealing with the government. So this is in demand. Have mapped that the request is something I've figured out how we can loop in like Yusafia to come and support that if it will be of interest. And but we can also work with the countries through TCPs or something to get something started. So there is always avenue to do something on that.
Yeah. Edward, I think Jeff wanted to say something.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This is really useful. I think, you know, we think if we look at things like wood fuel, right? And we have now emerging charcoal users associations and national charcoal unions, etc. They tend to feel the need to share experiences. We have governments who have had, you know, implemented positive and then banned charcoal and gone back and forth, etc. I guess the question in a way is it best to organize those kinds of, you know, multi-country, and I guess it depends, but, you know, exchanges and policies at the level of the ECOWAS or the SADC or, you know, Pan-African. So I think, and maybe it goes back and forth, but it's really helpful for us if we can try to, you know, get resources or some. So related to that also is a question of to what extent have we pushed in the regional office for more South-South cooperation funds for forest-related exchange, forest-related exchange, no, because it's mostly been agricultural. And we've found that, you know, a lot of the work we're doing, and I think many of us are doing, is very much South-South kind of exchange work, and they sort of are interested, but so far, because it's all been from China and it all came from their agriculture thing, and, you know, it's quite focused. But I think it could be a really good opportunity for us to broaden this, whether it's at the regional level or broader level. But I think that requires maybe joint, you know, strategic kind of planning between us to try to get more resources for those kinds of things.
You said it. Yeah, you said it. We need more resources to do those kind of things. And also, I think some of the South-South cooperation is happening, maybe in ad hoc level. Like, for example, when we worked together for the FFF, Pan-African Continental, Forum, with the GLF, the Global Landscape Forum, and the AFR 100 partnership meeting, even if it is not led by FAO, but FAO is pushing also and part of it. And I think many others can be really done and taken into consideration. And there are also projects that can be used for that. For example, we have the West Africa project that is ECOWAS project that was supported, studies supported by SIDA and is now under implementation. So there are, I think what we need to do is, of course, as you said, not just South-South cooperation with maybe countries that will be more, maybe different experiences or whatever, but in experience that is not really adapted to the region. First, looking at what the region has, and some of the countries in some sub-regions can really provide more support and knowledge and experience more than anyone else outside Africa, for instance, yeah? For example, we've done a lot of work also on the wildlife issues, the multi-stakeholder. We've organized a multi-stakeholder dialogue involving 12 countries, bringing them from East, South, Central, and West Africa, looking at the conflicts between forest, wildlife, and health, and etc. And it has been really very much, let's say, interesting and providing a good fertile ground actually to support pushing some, and better to have this type of work. And we need to identify also those and see how many of those we can support, but with resources mobilized from either TCPs and or from also projects.
This GF7, the dryland, charcoal is one of the commodity we are looking at, and one of the ideas is to come up with this regional hub on how we can share these practices, and particularly to see how we can regulate this. Because this morning on the preparation meeting, we had some government focal points who are here. We asked the questions, what they want to see being done regionally to deal with this. And I remember somebody from Zimbabwe and one from Namibia say, we'd like to have a way to regulate this charcoal. So already being seen, and they want to see this is what they want to spend the money from the impact program for the regional per se, let's say whatever amount they will allocate to support such kind of things. So we talk about value chains and other things, but they say, how do we deal with this? It's a big issue in the region. And there was a lot of example, you may know, that one country that's in the region giving the permit, the other countries maybe has a ban, but the things cross, there's a lot of irregularity. Things are not regulated in a manner and harmonized across the region, and this create lots of troubles. This is why we're getting more and more degraded forestry. So it's something being on the planning, and I think also we mentioned that we need a little bit of innovation to learn from how the FFF has done this. So we have that in mind, and I think there's a more of seeing, using. Exactly.
Yeah. Sub-regional programs can provide more opportunity, and also we have also our commissions and the weeks, African Forestry Wildlife Week. Those type of issues like wood and non-wood forest products, value chains, including charcoal, the wildlife, they are really at the heart of restoration, they are really at the heart of this commission and the week next. And we are using them also to education and profession, bringing also the knowledge and information, shared with the countries. Not just ad hoc. I think we need to look at the projects that exist, how we can bring the good practices from those projects to other countries from one side, but those countries need to have already also projects to implement. Otherwise, it's just, a visit, DSAs and a flight, and that's it. It is more than that. They need to implement and follow up with implementation. And from the other side, Africa Forestry Wildlife Weeks and events like the events that have been organized by Thais, for example, on wood, sustainable wood. I think charcoal, also the events that you have also led yourself during some of the GLF, Global Landscape Forums, etc., can be a good tool. I'm sorry if we have maybe to stop here. I hope you found this, let's say, meeting, you know, cozy and, you know, a good conversation at least to start putting the, you know, the ideas together. And I think the success, this is the success of the FTN. The success of the FTN, you know, we need follow-up action. So those priorities, I think we need to have a mapping of all what the great work you are doing here and in our region we are doing, and see also where we need more support. And even from there, we can identify the opportunities for South-South cooperation projects that can support and so on. And maybe we can follow it up at least at this stage like that. And also mention the projects that are already ongoing in those areas. So I thank you so much. It has been really wonderful to have this opportunity to talk to you here and with my colleagues from the region. And so I'm still here around today, and Edward also today, tomorrow, and then Thursday, and then Friday we are gone. So we hope to have time to chat a bit of minutes even, and follow up also through Skype and meetings. And I hope also to see some of you. I think some of you will be in South Africa, so in Edward's region. Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon. Bye.